Snow drifted softly across the windshield, turning the city into a glowing winter postcard. Inside the luxury car, warmth, quiet music, and the scent of pine filled the air. Everything about the moment said success, celebration, perfection. He adjusted his coat, glanced at his fiancée beside him, and told himself this was the life he had worked for, carefully built, publicly admired, unquestioned. A Christmas lunch awaited them, surrounded by people who applauded achievements and measured worth in quiet nods and polished smiles. The car slowed at a red light. And then the world cracked open. At the bus stop to the right, time seemed to slow, almost respectfully, as if the universe wanted him to see every detail. A woman stood there, her posture calm but tired, holding two small children close to her chest. Twins. Bundled in mismatched winter coats, their tiny faces pink from the cold, their eyes wide with curiosity. The woman shifted her weight gently, shielding them from the wind. That movement, so familiar, so unmistakable, sent a shock straight through him. His heart forgot how to beat. He knew that walk, that quiet strength, that way of protecting others before herself. It was her. The one person he had convinced himself belonged to the past. The one chapter he had sealed shut and labeled finished. Yet there she was, not alone, not waiting for him, but standing in a reality he had never imagined. The math hit him next, sharp and unforgiving. The timing. The ages. The resemblance he could not deny even from a distance. His throat tightened as understanding arrived without mercy. This wasn't coincidence. This wasn't fate playing a cruel trick. This was consequence. The light turned green. Cars behind him urged life forward, but inside him, everything stood still. In that frozen moment, he realized something life-changing. Success could buy comfort, admiration, even applause, but it could not erase truth. And the truth had just found him, standing quietly at a bus stop, wrapped in winter air and holding two tiny lives that would change him forever. The car moved again, but his mind stayed behind at that bus stop, trapped in the image he couldn't unsee. Every street light they passed felt slower, heavier, as if the city itself knew something sacred had just been revealed. His fiancée spoke beside him, her voice smooth and bright, describing the lunch ahead, the people they would meet, the expectations waiting behind tall doors. He nodded at the right moments, offered half smiles, and played the role he had perfected over years. Outwardly composed. Inwardly unraveling. With every mile, memories he had buried began to surface. Quiet mornings filled with laughter that didn't need explanation. Dreams spoken softly, never written down because they felt too fragile to expose. Promises he hadn't broken with words, but with hesitation. He had told himself that walking away was practical, that timing mattered more than feeling, that ambition required sacrifice. At the time it sounded logical. Now it felt hollow. The estate gates appeared ahead, decorated with lights and evergreen branches, a symbol of legacy and celebration. This place had shaped him, taught him how to win, how to plan, how to never look uncertain. Yet as he stepped out of the car, the cold air hit his face like a question he could no longer avoid. Inside those walls, everything would look perfect. Outside, at a quiet bus stop, something real was struggling forward without applause. As they walked toward the entrance, his chest tightened with a realization far more frightening than shock. The life he was about to present did not belong to his heart. It belonged to expectations, tradition, and a version of himself that felt increasingly distant. Somewhere behind him, two small lives existed without his name, his protection, his presence. And for the first time in years, he understood that success meant nothing if it was built by leaving behind what truly mattered. The house welcomed them with warmth and polished smiles, but he felt like a guest in a life that no longer fit. Laughter floated through the rooms, glasses clinked, and familiar faces offered praise for deals closed and futures secured. He responded automatically, shaking hands, accepting compliments, moving from one conversation to another as if guided by habit instead of intention. Yet with every step, the image of that bus stop pressed harder against his thoughts, refusing to fade. He watched families gather near the windows, children tugging at sleeves, parents bending down with gentle patience. Something inside him tightened. He realized how effortlessly love moved in small moments, without strategy, without approval. That was what he had once known. That was what he had let slip away because it didn't fit into a carefully planned timeline. His mother spoke about legacy. His relatives talked about growth and future generations. The words echoed strangely, almost mockingly, as if the universe were testing him. He found himself wondering how many people in the room truly felt present in their own lives, and how many, like him, were simply performing a role handed down over time. Then unexpectedly his phone vibrated in his pocket. For a heartbeat, the noise of the room disappeared. He stepped aside, his pulse quickening as he stared at the screen. An unknown number. He hesitated, then answered, his voice quieter than he intended. On the other end was a calm, steady tone, familiar in a way that sent a rush of emotion through him. No accusations. No demands. Just a simple acknowledgement of coincidence and timing. That call didn't give him answers. It gave him something more powerful, choice. In that moment, surrounded by comfort and approval, he understood that courage wasn't about maintaining control. It was about facing truth even when it threatened everything he thought he had built. The call ended quietly, yet its echo stayed with him long after the screen went dark. He returned to the gathering, but something had shifted so deeply that even the room seemed different. The laughter sounded distant, the compliments lighter, almost fragile. He watched his fiancée across the room, radiant and confident, speaking easily with relatives who already approved of her place beside him. She fit perfectly into this world. And that was the problem. Perfection left no room for truth. As lunch was announced and everyone moved toward the long dining table, he felt a weight pressing against his chest. The kind that doesn't come from fear, but from knowing a moment of decision has arrived. He remembered the woman at the bus stop, how she had stood there without anger, without drama, holding responsibility in both arms. No luxury surrounded her, no audience applauded her strength. Yet she carried something far greater than status, purpose. Halfway through the meal he excused himself, stepping outside into the crisp air. Snow crunched beneath his shoes as he paced the quiet path, his breath visible with every exhale. For the first time he allowed himself to admit what he had been avoiding for years. He had confused success with fulfillment. He had chosen safety over sincerity. And now life was offering him a chance to correct course, not with grand gestures but with honesty. Standing there alone, he understood that courage doesn't arrive loudly. It whispers. It asks uncomfortable questions. It demands responsibility, not applause. And as the cold air cleared his thoughts, he knew that walking back inside without change would be the greatest loss of all. He didn't return to the table right away. Instead, he stood beneath the winter sky, letting the silence press against him until his thoughts settled into clarity. Inside the house, everything was arranged to celebrate the future that had already been decided for him. Outside, in the cold, he felt closer to the truth than he had in years. That contrast was impossible to ignore. When he finally stepped back in, his fiancée noticed the change immediately. She asked if he was all right, her concern genuine, but he could not offer the easy reassurance she expected. For the first time he chose honesty over comfort. His words were calm, respectful, and deliberate. He spoke about timing, about responsibility, about realizing that a life built on appearances alone eventually collapses under its own weight. There were no accusations, only clarity. The room felt still as understanding settled in. Some moments don't need drama to be powerful. They simply need truth. He excused himself once more, this time not to escape but to act. Hours later, he found himself standing near that same bus stop, the city quieter now, lights glowing softly against the snow. He didn't know what words would come, only that they had to be real. When he finally saw her again, there was surprise, but also steadiness, in her eyes. He didn't arrive with promises or explanations. He arrived with accountability. He acknowledged what he had failed to see before and what he was ready to face now. And in that honest exchange, something rare happened. The past loosened its grip, making space for a future built not on perfection, but on courage and truth. He didn't return to the table right away. Instead, he stood beneath the winter sky, letting the silence press against him until his thoughts settled into clarity. Inside the house, everything was arranged to celebrate a future already chosen for him. Outside, in the cold, he felt closer to the truth than he had in years. That contrast was impossible to ignore. When he finally stepped back in, his fiancée noticed the change immediately. She asked if he was all right, her concern sincere, but he could not offer the easy reassurance she expected. For the first time he chose honesty over comfort. His words were calm, respectful, and deliberate. He spoke about timing, about responsibility, about realizing that a life built only on appearances eventually collapses under its own weight. There were no accusations, only clarity. Silence followed, not heavy but understanding. Some moments don't need drama to be powerful. They simply need truth. Later that evening, the city felt quieter, almost reflective as he returned to the same bus stop. Snow rested gently on the pavement and streetlights cast long shadows. He didn't come with rehearsed lines or bold promises. He came with accountability. When she appeared, surprise flickered across her face, but there was strength there too, the same strength he had seen earlier. He spoke honestly, acknowledging what he had failed to recognize before and what he was finally ready to face now. He listened without interruption. And in that exchange something shifted. Not everything was healed. Not everything was decided. But for the first time truth stood between them, clear, steady and real, opening the door to a future built on courage instead of regret. The days that followed didn't transform everything overnight, but they transformed him. For the first time in his life he began to move without an audience in mind. He listened more than he spoke. He learned the rhythm of small routines. Early mornings, quiet responsibilities, moments that didn't announce their importance but carried it anyway. The twins didn't recognize titles or achievements. They responded only to presence, patience, and consistency. And slowly that taught him something no boardroom ever had. He realized that real strength wasn't found in control, but in showing up when it would be easier to stay distant. Real success wasn't measured in headlines, but in who trusted you enough to take your hand. The woman he once thought he had lost forever didn't offer forgiveness easily, nor should she have. What she offered was honesty, and the space to prove change through actions, not words. As winter gave way to spring, his life no longer looked perfect from the outside. But it felt real on the inside. He redefined ambition, choosing purpose over pressure and meaning over momentum. The world still saw him as powerful, but he finally understood where true power lived. In accountability, in humility, and in choosing what matters even when it costs you comfort. Years later he would think back to that quiet bus stop on a snowy day. Not as the moment his life fell apart, but as the moment it finally began. Because sometimes the most life-changing miracles don't arrive wrapped in celebration. They arrive quietly, asking only one thing in return: the courage to choose truth and never turn away again.